again to the CMCR Investigators Meeting. As you can see on the screen right here, you can get continuing education for this meeting. If you go ahead and text the activity code to this phone number, you need to have signed up first with a UCSD CME office, so be sure to do that. We're also working on upping our social media presence. We've had a number of podcasts now developed, and so please feel free to look us up on any of these social media links or go to our website. So we're really pleased today to have Dr. Ryan Vandrey present. Dr. Vandrey is an experimental psychologist and professor at Johns Hopkins University Behavioral Pharmacology Research Unit, where he leads the Cannabis Science Lab. His research over the years has focused on the impact of the route of administration, the dose, and the chemical composition of cannabis products and their resultant drug effects and pharmacokinetics. His lab and his trainees have been phenomenally productive and done groundbreaking work in the area of behavioral pharmacology. So we're really pleased to have Dr. Vandrey join us. He recently received funding to start a medicinal cannabis patient registry, but I'm sure he has other things in the fire as well, which maybe he'll share with us. So Ryan, thanks again for joining us, and it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Tom. I really appreciate it. And so, Felicia, if you stop sharing your thing, I can jump in and share mine. While we've typically done things much more lab-oriented presentations, I'm going to switch things up a little bit today and talk about that new kind of observational research project that we have. And so let's see if I can move this thing out of the way. So I want to kind of talk about this new thing, and I want to point out right here at the beginning that the other PI on this project is Johannes Thruel, and I want to make sure that he gets proper credit right up front with all of this because he's been integral to getting this thing done. And so with the requisite disclosures, I do have consulting work that I do with the industry outside of the research, but it doesn't really impact anything that I'm going to talk about here. So I just kind of want to lay the groundwork a little bit on the background here and talk about some past work that we've done in this area and how it led to the large NIH grant that we recently got. So as I'm sure everybody here knows, medicinal cannabis use is increasingly approved, accepted, available. Cannabis of all different types are being used for all different kinds of health conditions. But there's just a huge variety of the types of products that people are using. So, when we talk about medicinal cannabis, what are we talking about? What does it mean? We've got inhaled products, oral products, suppositories, topical products. There exists in parallel these pharmaceutical products that you can kind of see at the bottom. FDA has approved THC and CBD for multiple indications and had done so for several years. But then there's this whole other secondary, botanical cannabis market that's not within the purview of the FDA and is regulated by state programs. So when you look at all of this, we're really lacking data in a number of areas in terms of what products people should use, how they should be using it, what doses to start with, and all that kind of stuff. So the greatest synthesis of evidence to support the therapeutic use of cannabis and cannabinoids came from the National Academy's report, which now is 8 years old, which is kind of crazy. And my hope is that this gets updated sometime soon. But what the National Academies kind of found at the time was that there is conclusive or substantial evidence to support the clinical use of cannabinoids for chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, and nausea or emesis due to chemotherapy. Now, the nausea or emesis due to chemotherapy is the FDA-approved indication for THC. The chronic pain and multiple sclerosis is outside of FDA-approved indications for anything. There is moderate evidence to support short-term use for sleep dysfunction, It was shown to be ineffective for dementia, glaucoma, depression associated with pain or MS. And then shortly after this report was issued, Epidiolex was approved for 3 different rare seizure disorders. And so if you look at that report, while it says that there's a lot of data to support the use, most of the clinical trials were conducted with purified pharmaceutical formulation. So it was dronabinol or it was Epidiolex or something like that. So most of it was not cannabis. A lot of the studies were relatively small. Still to this date, there are very, very few studies where cannabinoid treatments have been compared directly with alternative treatments for a particular symptom or health condition. And so given the increasing variety of the types of cannabis products that are available, this is still constantly evolving. It's really challenging and difficult for both clinicians and patients to figure out what's the best approach. Should I try therapeutic cannabinoids? If so, what product do I use? How do I use it? And all of that kind of stuff. Along the lines of the proliferation of product diversity, we're now really seeing even a greater explosion in the availability of minor cannabinoids, alternative semi-synthetic cannabinoids, and claims about the role of terpenes in all of this. And so we really need to understand how this works. And so going back about 10 years now, my colleagues and I at Hopkins have been involved with a longitudinal observational research patient registry run by the Realm of Caring Foundation in Colorado. And so we recognized then, and this started about 3 years before the National Academies came out, there was just a dearth of information for patients and providers on how to conceptualize, how to use, how to think about the impact that medicinal cannabis use had on the health of individual patients. So at the time, there was a lot of research on public health related impacts of these state regulated medical cannabis programs in terms of, what were the overall rates of driving fatalities, opioid use, opioid overdoses, but very little at the individual patient level in terms of impact. And so that was really the aim of this project, was to recruit people who were using cannabis as a therapeutic or who were considering the use of cannabis as a therapeutic and plan to initiate use in the future, to kind of come in and do some web-based survey studies. And what we did is we kind of identified a handful of general health questionnaires that were validated and used commonly in a variety of different research programs, and had people fill these things out online. When we did our initial evaluation of a little over 1,200 patients in this survey, we compared the people who were using cannabis to people who were contemplating use. So there were non-users at the time of completing the survey, but they were matched on demographics, the types of health conditions that they were interested in or using cannabis for. And we kind of looked at quality of life and pain and sleep and anxiety and depression, things like that. And when we did this cross-sectional comparison, we found that the medicinal cannabis users overall had higher self-reported ratings of quality of life, better pain management, better sleep, better mood, and were using fewer prescription medications, had fewer emergency room visits, and fewer hospital admissions in the prior year compared to the non-using controls. And so we're like, all right, this is really interesting. This is a signal that on a fairly large patient cohort, cannabis users tended to be a little bit better off compared with the non-user controls. So what we then did is we took that data set and we started drilling down into targeted patient populations to look and see, okay, at the aggregate, that's what's happening, but what's happening within specific cohorts within this population. So one of the largest patient cohorts was epilepsy, and that is really driven by the fact that Realm of Caring Foundation was founded as a resource for parents who had of kids with epilepsy. And so we had the caregivers do observational ratings of the patients that they cared for. And one of the key differences between the folks that were using artisanal CBD products versus those who are not is that there was better control, or there were fewer medication-related adverse events. So the folks that were using CBD, and these were largely adjunctive CBD use, not just CBD use to control their epilepsy, but they had fewer medication-related adverse events compared to those who were not using it. And there was really no difference between the two groups in terms of seizure control. Another cohort that we looked at were folks that self-reported that anxiety or depression were the primary reasons for which they were either using medicinal cannabis or were considering the use of medicinal cannabis. And what I want you to focus in on is there's 3 different groups here. So this is where we're kind of incorporating the longitudinal nature of this experiment, where we had people complete these surveys every 3 months for as long as they were willing to do it. And so the folks in the solid black bars on the left-hand side of the anxiety and depression figures here are the folks that were already using medicinal cannabis when they first completed a survey, and they were still using cannabis when they completed their next follow-up survey. And what we can see there is that for the folks with anxiety, their anxiety continued to go down over time, as did their depression. The white bars on the right-hand side are the folks that were not using and never initiated use during the study. And so they remained the same and remained unchanged over time. The folks who were using cannabis and remained using cannabis had lower rates of depression than the non-user controls. But the group in the middle with the straight bars is the one that's most interesting to me, because this is a within subject comparison of the same patients who were not using cannabis when we first surveyed them, and then they initiated cannabis use later. And this is their ratings of anxiety and depression going down both statistically significantly and clinically significantly over time.
What specific action do I need to take in response to this email message?
I'm not sure what email message you're talking about. So I'm going to continue wondering if Ron was to maybe talking to somebody else. So kind of peeling off of that observation of the reduction in anxiety and depression in our web-based observational cohort with the Colorado group, Justin Strickland and I recruited a sample of 33 patients who were new to cannabis completely and who were newly enrolled in the Maryland Medical Cannabis Program, and reported either anxiety or depression at a clinically significant level at baseline before starting cannabis use. We were able to collect baseline measures from them and to follow them for 6 months after they started their medical cannabis treatment. But in addition to kind of doing some longitudinal occasional follow-ups about their anxiety and depression, we also did ecological momentary assessments with them where they filled out daily diaries for several weeks leading up to their start of medical cannabis use, and then for 8 weeks after. And so we probed them each time they used a cannabis product, and we asked them, how high do you feel? What's your level of anxiety? What's your level of depression? We asked pain and sleep and some other things like that. But I want to kind of highlight a couple outcomes from this study. One is that these folks, in contrast to the Realm of Caring folks, were predominantly using THC dominant cannabis products. Again, if they were going to use CBD, they wouldn't have needed to go through the pain of registering with the Maryland State Registry. But so these folks were using high THC products through a variety of routes of administration: smoked, vaporized, and oral ingestion. And when they did use these products from pre to post dosing, they increased the subjective feeling that they were high, but they had subjective decreases in their ratings of both anxiety and depression. So this is acute effects. You're seeing acute effects in terms of reduction of their symptoms. They used a range of doses. The sweet spot seemed to be on oral dosing in the 6 to 15 milligram range. And you see reductions in depression kind of highest and anxiety highest in that 6 to 15 milligram dose range. So we got an inverted U-shape function in terms of acute effects on anxiety and depression, which is common in behavioral pharmacology. And then longitudinally, when we followed these folks from baseline to 6 months, this dotted line here at the 8 rating on both the hospital anxiety, and depression scale scores is kind of the level of clinical significance on this item. So these folks significantly reduced both their anxiety and depression. It was sustained for 6 months, and it went from high above clinical significance levels to below clinical significance levels. So this gives us longitudinal, prospective, within subject observations of significant reductions in anxiety and depression with folks using medical cannabis. But again, a sample size of only 33, a convenience cohort only in the state of Maryland. Now, Johannes has done a number of ecological momentary assessment studies looking at folks who are using both opioids and cannabinoids for chronic pain conditions. And his process there has demonstrated really good feasibility of using app-based data collection in real time to record cannabis use events and health-related outcomes, similar to what I just showed you in that sample size of 33 folks in the state of Maryland. This is in a larger group, over 100 individuals nationally. And you can see we've got greater than 90% compliance with daily diaries and 70% completion of the momentarily daily surveys over many, many weeks. So excellent adherence to the intervention. And these are very sick individuals in terms of most of them having a high disability and being severely limited by their chronic pain. And what we found here is that when we look at product use on a given day and the perception of pain relief by the individual, it was greatest when they on days when they used both cannabinoids and opioids. Second, when it was cannabis only, and less when it was opioids only. So here we're able to look at the interactions between cannabis therapeutics with other therapeutics, and also differentiating two different methods of treating the symptoms within the same individuals. So again, that comparative efficacy that's lacking from clinical trials. Another area of research that we've done ahead of this is looking at quality control issues with retail products. We've done a number of kind of product surveillance studies to evaluate dose label accuracy. Other folks have done research where you're identifying contaminants, biocontaminants, residual solvents. Other drugs have been documented in a lot of CBD and THC vape products. And so we also look at the label content in terms of unsubstantiated health claims. And this is an area that we are looking to integrate and to further expand. So in our prior work, we evaluated CBD oils sold over the internet. Dose label accuracy was generally poor. And then the other kind of big highlight that I always like to point out is just the huge range of active drug in products that by and large look and appear similar to the purchaser. So when you look at the range of CBD in terms of milligrams per milliliter of liquid, the range was 1 to 800 milligrams per milliliter. But these products all are in similar looking bottles. The labels were not very good. These are concerns. When we did a research study looking at dose label accuracy in edibles, this was the early days of medical cannabis in California and Washington. We just found, again, a huge range of cannabinoid content, very poorly accurate in terms of milligrams on the label versus what was in the product. I believe this has gotten a lot better with state regulations getting improved. And then more recently, we did a topical CBD testing study where we purchased products both online and from brick and mortar retail stores in the Baltimore area. And we again see just huge variation in terms of the deviation of what's labeled on the product versus what's actually in the product when it's tested. In addition to dose label accuracy, we were kind of just really surprised at some of the label claims that were on some of these topical products, where a lot of them that were labeled to be THC free had THC in them. A lot of them were making unsubstantiated claims or therapeutic claims. And so there's a concern with all of that. So with that background, that's kind of what we've done, but those were all done as a kind of a hodgepodge and by and large, very poorly funded kind of ancillary studies that we had. Of all of that work, only Johannes's R21 was NIH funded. And so we were able to cobble all that together and put in an application, and we were awarded a UM1 grant from NIDA to basically take all of that kind of work and put it into one big package and scale it up. And so we developed, and we're calling this a Cannabis and Health Research Initiative. And it incorporates a lot of what I talked about, in addition to some measures development, building out a new longitudinal observational research study with newly initiating medicinal cannabis users. We're going to incorporate the web-based surveys, the ecological momentary assessment, and some biomarkers. We're getting into AI tools for probing electronic medical records, building a data repository, and doing some other things. And so the website, cannabisandhealth.org, is active and live, and you can go and click around and check out what we're up to. There's not a ton of data there yet, but we're hoping that that's going to be changing moving forward. So I want to kind of just provide an overview of the team and all of the folks that are involved in really the multidisciplinary approach that we're taking to all of this. So as I mentioned, Johannes and I are kind of co-PIs on this. Realm of Caring that I mentioned to you is a nonprofit in Colorado, is functioning as the data coordinating center. And given the role that they had in our earlier observational work, we wanted to continue working with them and to use their experience with patient and provider interaction to make sure that we're doing this right, we're covering the right things, and we're scaling things up. We have an outstanding external advisory board that balances expertise across industry experience, patient representatives, market experts, biostatistical experts, survey experts, and all of those kinds of things. We've partnered with multiple media groups on big scale advertising. We're going to continue to do product testing with El Soli Laboratories as really the gold standard for cannabis product testing, and the capability of getting and identifying and securing products that are not in the federal chain of custody and getting access to them for testing. And again, kind of building out multiple prongs of this research, where we're doing the development of an online survey, development of an EMA protocol, doing some biospecimen testing, doing product testing, and building large language models to identify medical cannabis users in electronic health records, and also developing tools to go into the electronic health records to better capture medical cannabis use moving forward in things like Epic. So I want to go into a little more detail on on some of those things now, and talk about spending more time on things that we've actually accomplished in the first 2 years of our funding right now. We're actually a little less than 2 years into the project, but we're 2 grant years. Not that that makes much of a difference. But one of the first things that we wanted to do was to develop and validate a quantitative measure of cannabis use behavior that captures the array of current retail products. So right now, and I'm sure everybody here is aware, a lot of people are using their own kind of home-cooked questionnaires and surveys about what kind of cannabis products people are using. But the validated assessments, Kerry Cutler's assessment and some of the other things are just outdated now. They don't capture all of the forms of edibles, the variety of vaporization versus smoked products. Topicals are not captured at all, and there's no differentiation of chemotype. And so we've been working for several years to kind of get a good questionnaire that encompasses all of that, but is not so overly burdensome to the individual survey taker. So we call it the Cannabis Use Questionnaire. We assess product type across 9 different categories. So we break things down initially by use of flower, electronic cigarette or e-liquid type products, concentrates, oils and tinctures, edibles, topicals, suppositories, pharmaceutical products like dronabinol and Epidiolex, and then anything else that doesn't fit into one of those bins. Once a participant identifies which of those categories are products that they use, they then get a breakdown of additional questions to follow up to capture the chemotype. So each product is designated as being THC dominant, CBD dominant, a balanced ratio, or some other minor cannabinoid dominant product. We capture dose, we capture frequency of use, and then the dose, the units of measure are specific to the route of administration and the form of the product. So for example, edible products are typically labeled as milligrams of THC or CBD per serving, and so we capture all of that in milligrams. On the inhalation side, we capture number of puffs, and we're taking data from our laboratory studies, human laboratory studies, where we've captured puff topography for known doses being consumed, and we're developing an algorithm to identify on aggregate for an adult male and an adult female, approximately how many milligrams of THC would be in the first, second, third, fourth, fifth puff taken of a THC dominant, CBD dominant product. And whether it's flower, whether it's vaporized, whether it's smoked, and all of that kind of stuff. So we're developing all of that to give quantitative estimates of THC and CBD exposure across all of these products. So we've completed pilot testing and gotten patient feedback and focus groups, and the instrument is currently undergoing retest validity, and our expectation and our hope is to publish this at some point this summer. So we have fully programmed versions of this questionnaire in both REDCap and Qualtrics, and our intent is to put downloads on our website so that anybody can download the basically that program and import it into their own REDCap or Qualtrics surveys. We'll also have the full survey with all of the details if anybody needs to program something into a different platform. So if anybody is interested in this, even before it's validated, we're happy to share. Just email me later. The second thing that we're trying to do is to come up with a core assessment battery for health outcomes in cannabis research. And so the aim here is to identify key areas of interest when for researchers doing medicinal cannabis, observational studies, or clinical studies for that matter. We convened a group of experts a couple years ago to kind of identify target endpoints of interest, and conducted a detailed literature review of assessments for those endpoints that are validated, and we rated them on accessibility, cost, brevity, prevalence of use in published studies, adaptability, meaning, are they available in multiple languages and things like that. And we came up with this list. So I'm not going to belabor and go through all of these. I'm happy to share this with anybody and talk through the rationale. Again, we have a manuscript that's been fully drafted that describes the reasoning behind the selection of all of these products. And again, happy to share the products, happy to share REDCap or Qualtrics programming for anybody that needs it. And the intent of developing and recommending this core assessment is that if the more people that adopt these assessments when they're measuring pain or anxiety or quality of life, the better we're going to be able to compare across research studies and to integrate data in meaningful ways across studies, so we can kind of combine data sets. And I'll get to a little bit more on data set combination later when I talk about the data repository that we're building. So what I want to talk about now is just kind of going through and talking a little bit about the details of our observational longitudinal study that's currently live. The title for this thing is the National Cannabis Study. It's similar to the Realm of Caring study, with the exception that we are only taking people new to cannabis. And so we're going to be recruiting people, reaching out to providers newly starting cannabis of any type on their own. So this is including hemp product use. We're going to be recruiting, as I mentioned, through a company called Vandrey, which is a broker that connects patients who are interested in trying medicinal cannabis use with providers that make the recommendations, oftentimes required by state medical cannabis programs, and through advertising, through healthcare systems, and through patient advocacy organizations. Our aim is to enroll 10,000 people nationwide, and it'll be a prospective study in which we collect a battery of baseline assessments before they start using cannabis. Then we collect post-cannabis use assessments 1 month, 3 months, and 12 months after initiation. In addition, we are going to take a subset of 500 of those individuals and do intensive ecological momentary assessment monitoring for 1 week around each of the web-based survey time points. An additional 250 people are going to be recruited into a biospecimen testing sub-study, where we're going to do collect bloods and have them tested for clinical chemistry and cannabinoid content at baseline, and again 12 months later, so that we can look at things like changes in liver function, changes in diabetes risk, changes in inflammatory biomarkers, and such. And then I mentioned before also the cannabis product testing. So one of the aims for our cannabis product testing is, as we're doing these assessments with these newly initiated cannabis users, is participants who report adverse events of some notable significance. We're going to try to get the participants to ship those products to El Soli for testing to see, is the adverse event being driven by a specific product type? Is it related to poor dose label accuracy? Is it related to some contaminant or other unknown constituent in the product? And that's going to be really helpful for us to link the quality control issues to adverse patient experiences. And the advantage of this project over a lot of other observational studies is the fact that we're going to have baseline assessments for all of these folks. And we're going to have, again, with a sample size of 10,000, a very large, and this is a very intensive and comprehensive assessment battery that we've got going on. For the EMA thing, we're going to capture pre-post dosing for everybody and know exactly what products they're taking. So where we are currently with this project, and I alluded to Tom and Felicia earlier, that we've hit some hiccups that I think are really important to communicate to this group so that you can try to avoid the same problems that we had. So we did all of the initial development of the project. We did 2 soft launches to work out all the bugs and kinks with the programming, and got that to the point where we were really happy with it. We had 70 participants that were recruited into the study with 2 one-day pushes through Vandrey. So the recruiting strategy was working really well. And right when we were about to go with a full, tens of thousands of dollars ad campaign, we got hit with a cyber attack where bots were going in and completing the survey, and people were trying to get our gift cards because we are compensating participants for each survey completed. But thankfully, we had the foresight that the compensation is not automatic. We do data validation prior to delivery of the gift cards. But we had, overnight, the first night, probably 200 new entries with no advertising. Then the next night came 300. Then the next night came 500. And they were failing multiple attention checks, but some were passing. And so we revisited all of the security on our platform. We revised the reCAPTCHA that was being used and switched it to the Google reCAPTCHA, which we've read up was the better one to use. We had attention checks throughout in terms of both questions that people had to review and select a specific answer, like which is round, a basketball, a square, a triangle, or whatever. And there were hidden questions that the participant can't see, but a bot would fill out. With all of that, the sophistication of the cyber attack was able to pass all of those in many cases. So we added an SMS verification of the individual that required a code to be sent to their cell phone. The cell phone had to be a phone number in Canada or the US, and they had to have a US-based IP address on their computer. Now, that cleared things for a couple days, and then the cyber attackers revised their program and were able to even beat that with bouncing signals off of Google Voice numbers and other things without getting into too many of the dirty details. So we had to shut the entire program down for 2 months, redo a whole bunch of stuff, and get IRB approval to add a third-party ID verification system that banks often use for bank transfers. So we just got the IRB approval to do that. We're planning on relaunching the study next week, but this VerifID verification requires that the person filling out the survey, after they do the consent and pass the consent quiz and eligibility, they get bounced from REDCap to the VerifID website. We have an account with them. The person has to live on their phone, scan a photo government issued ID and take a selfie, and Verif is within a couple minutes able to verify that it's a valid ID, that the face of the person holding the device matches the picture on the ID that they're showing, and then kicks it back to us. Our hope is that that's going to work. But just a heads up for anybody thinking about these web-based things where there's any kind of compensation, you have to be very, very, very careful of security right now. So moving on to one of our other big projects within the CHRI initiative is to build tools for using electronic medical records as data. So one of the issues is that in many electronic medical records, cannabis and specifically therapeutic use of cannabis is not often available as a diagnostic code in any way, shape, or form, and it's not often recorded with kind of predetermined coded questions, but it's often entered into clinical notes. And so we've been working with computer scientists here at Hopkins to build machine learning, natural language processing tools that can go in and identify, using clinical notes, medical cannabis users within that cohort, identifying what kind of product they're using, why they're using it, the chemotype of the product, if that's recorded. And so these large things are able to kind of go in and work through these clinical notes to categorize people in these things. And we can then use those patient records to identify matched non-cannabis using controls, and to compare the two on clinical outcomes, healthcare utilization, and other key metrics to, again, look at on a very big scale and on a systems-wide level, the health impact of medicinal cannabis use on individual health outcomes. So in building this for the Hopkins healthcare system data set, we can then push this back out to similar programs that are available in multiple other health systems. So it's a scalable program through the Observational Health and Data Science and Informatics program, which is has access to 810 million patients across 74 countries. So currently within the Hopkins Health System, we have the electronic health records for 800,000 patients, including 2.1 million records. So we're able to look longitudinally or prospectively over time with a lot of these patients. These are all folks that have a diagnostic code for chronic pain, mood disorder, anxiety, PTSD, epilepsy, and autism. And so our annotation tool is developed, it's deployed, and actually we are running the large language model on this cohort of 2.1 million records starting tomorrow. It's going to take about 1 to 2 weeks to fully load and evaluate and categorize and run. But the idea is that in a couple of weeks, we're going to have this categorization for as much as possible, characterizing these folks on cannabis use status, use frequency, the purpose for use, the chemotype route, and any indication of misuse or adverse events such as cannabis hyperemesis syndrome. And so here's an example of what the annotation tool does. So in the clinical note, there it says the patient is utilizing a 1-to-1 THC to CBD tincture, 20 milligrams total, twice daily for neuropathic pain secondary to diabetes. It was initiated 2 months ago. So the large language model will identify and categorize this patient on the type of cannabis being used, the amount, the frequency, the health condition for which it's being used, another health condition, and the duration of it's being used. And so it can do this rapidly for, again, over 2 million clinical notes. And the third major subcategory of this larger initiative is to build out a data repository. So all of the data that we collect in this study is going to go into a repository that we're going to make publicly available to other researchers or policy makers. So in addition to that, all of the realm of caring data that we've collected with them is going to go in here. And we're looking for other scientists who collected relatable research on the health impacts in any way, shape, or form of cannabis use to donate data to this repository. We have a full-time data scientist who's in charge with data integration. And again, this comes back to that core assessment battery that I mentioned a while ago. As we started conceptualizing and thinking through this repository and how to integrate data sets, the importance of that core assessment battery became abundantly clear. And the more folks we can get to adopt at least some of those measures, the easier and the better this repository is going to be. So one of the things to keep in mind for this group also is that starting in hopefully late this year or early next calendar year, we will have this repository established and characterized and put together enough that it'll be made available to other people who are interested in using it. We're going to treat it kind of like PATH and NESARC in that in order to get access to the data, you need to have a hypothesis and you need to have either IRB approval or an IRB exemption. But if you meet those categories and you're doing it for academic research, we will give you the data that you need. In addition, we're going to launch a pilot grants program to support junior scientists who are interested in working with the data and need salary support or need material support to do the work that they want to do. Another piece of our program, and this is live and available on the website right now, is we're building out a research library of peer-reviewed journal articles that relate to the therapeutic effects of cannabis and cannabinoids. It's searchable by keyword, health condition, age group, species, whether on the preclinical side, whether it's in vitro or in vivo work, and research methodology. So whether it's an RCT or an observational study or lab study, things like that. Each indexed article has the title, the author's journal, and the abstract provided right there on our website. And there's a clickable direct link that goes right to the journal for full text access. Currently, we have over 2,600 articles indexed, and we're adding about 100 per week to this total. So where we're going from here is really just about taking all of this and moving things forward. So we're scaling up, and we're hoping that we've solved our cyber attack crisis on the observational study, and that we are primed and ready for a big marketing campaign to get a lot more than 70 people into that study. And we believe that the data there is going to be immensely valuable for both patients and providers to make determinations, to make decisions, for us to identify health conditions where positive outcomes are more likely than not. We're going to identify health areas where the evidence just does not look good. The advantage of us starting with an entire cohort that are all non-cannabis users and following them prospectively is we're going to have a really good sense of the people for which medical cannabis does not work. I think a lot of the current patient databases we have miss those folks because they recruit people who are already using cannabis or have been using cannabis for an extended period of time. We really miss out on the folks that try it and it doesn't work for them. We are going to continue to build out the EHR work. We're, again, building tools that can go into the electronic health records in the form of flow sheets and smart forms that can be completed by both patients and providers to capture detailed cannabis use information that would be quantitative in addition to our AI systems for probing the clinical notes. And hopefully, again, the adoption of our core assessments battery will increase the capability of our repository and what we can do with those data sets as we get them. And then the last thing is I want to really kind of stress to anybody here who's interested in this kind of work, but maybe for a particular patient population or a particular type of data assessment that might be in addition to what we're already doing. Our whole program has been built intentionally as a platform that could be used by other researchers to add on ancillary projects to. So the idea here is that we've built out this program. We have the platform, we've got access to patients, or we've got the platform that could be used to expand into additional patient populations with targeted recruiting and advertising. So we're looking for 10,000 patients, kind of agnostic to what particular health condition. But if someone was particularly interested in, say, autism, you could write a grant to NIH and get it to recruit an additional 500 or 1,000 autism patients and use our platform. And we can kind of tag those patients, send you the data, and you can analyze it without having to build the surveys and to build all the other infrastructure that we've already built. So with that, I'm going to kind of wrap up and leave some time for discussion and questions, but I do need to acknowledge all of the folks that have kind of come through and been huge and been a part of this. I've mentioned many of them before, but Clarissa Madar and Serena Dubois, Nick Dobbins, Destiny Schreifer on our side have been absolutely huge in getting this thing off the ground. Hugo's our data integration manager, and Rob is our website guy, and he's the one that solved the cyber attack stuff. So can't say enough thanks to him. Heather Kimmel at NIDA, this is her brainchild. She's the one that wrote the RFA that supported this grant, and Elise Grossman's the PO. So with that, I want to thank everybody for listening. Here's my contact information and our websites again, and thank you.